Yeah, that's a really good question that we should all think about. I've pretty much exclusively worked in places where I'm not from. And so you have to just be so conscious of not being kind of extractive and not parachuting in. And what is the thing that you're adding, right? Like, why are you telling this? Is there somebody here that could do it better? And for me, I'm often in places where there's not a lot of journalists, if any journalists, so it feels like just actually documenting the thing is important for posterity.
Welcome to another episode of Tech in the Arts, the podcast series of the Arts Management and Technology Laboratory. The goal of our podcast series is to exchange ideas, bring awareness, and stay on top of the trends. My name is Jabrenee Hussie, the podcast producer for AMTLab. My pronouns are she, her. Today, I'm joined by Roopa Gogineni, photographer, filmmaker, and a photojournalist from West Virginia, now based between Paris and Atlanta. She has lived in Nairobi, developing practices rooted in co-creation, working alongside communities across the region, directed reality TV in Somalia, and documented revolutionary theater in Sudan. Speaking of Sudan, her latest short, SuddenlyTV, which is about magical thinking and revolution, earned the 2023 South by Southwest Special Jury Award and the 2023 Indie Lisboa Short Film Grand Prize.
How did you get into photography and filmmaking?
I was always into photography and into cameras, and I took a couple of photography classes when I was in university, but I didn't know how to make a career of it. I was also really interested in working internationally. I went to a liberal arts school and I studied history and African studies, and I was just interested in a lot of things. And so I sort of graduated not having a clear idea of what I wanted to do for work. And I applied to many different jobs, none of which I got. And I sort of, on a whim, emailed this photographer whose work I had presented in a photography class, who lived in Nairobi. And I had spent some time in Nairobi on an internship and was studying Swahili, and asked if I could be his assistant, and he wrote back and said yes. And then so I went to Kenya and worked with him and then another photographer for a few months, and that was sort of it. It was the way that they got to kind of experience the world felt. The first job that I'd had in Nairobi the summer before this internship was at an NGO, and it was in a regional office of a big international NGO in a communications department, and it just felt like so far removed from any actual work. Like, all we were doing was writing reports about reports, and it just felt kind of hollow. And the photojournalist, the work of photojournalism is like very engaged and sort of on the ground and with people, and that was way more fun for me.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
You have a BA in Diplomatic History and African Studies from the University of Pennsylvania and a Master's in African Studies from the University of Oxford. How does your education influence your work?
In a number of ways. So I moved to Kenya and started working as a journalist, and the fact that I had read a lot of history and read a lot about the politics of East Africa and specifically Somalia and Sudan was really helpful in terms of working as a journalist. Like, I had kind of this social political history that was really valuable. And then I guess another reason that my education kind of gave me I think an interesting perspective was that my master's degree, it was in African studies, but I wrote a dissertation on news gathering in Somalia. And I knew at that point when I went to grad school, I knew that I wanted to be a journalist and to work in journalism. So I sort of shaped my grad degree into a massive networking exercise and spent my field work just talking to as many journalists and editors as I could. And it was great in terms of just meeting a lot of people, but it was also, I learned about how editorial agendas were set, which was really disturbing actually, because at the time it was, news was online or was increasingly online, and there was a lot of analytics that were being collected, and data became really important in determining what stories were made. So it was sort of this consumption of news that was driving the production of news. And so that kind of knowledge also helped me understand the kind of work that I wanted to make, which was often really hard to pitch because it wasn't obviously one of the stories. For example, in Somalia, they kept writing about pirates. I mean, piracy was definitely an issue, but people consumed pirate stories a lot. And so it was sort of this chicken and egg thing. And, I knew that I didn't want to write those stories or make those stories. So it was also an education in learning sort of what I was up against when I started working. That's what I would say as to how my schooling has helped my career.
Wow. So you're a freelance photographer and filmmaker. What are some of the challenges and triumphs of being freelance?
Oh, this is a good question. So when I finished grad school, I moved to Kenya, and I was told by a friend that he might hire me for this position at Al Jazeera Swahili, which was going to be launched. And that's sort of why, I moved there with this hope. And then Al Jazeera Swahili never got off the ground because they pulled the funding and started Al Jazeera America, RIP. And so then there was no full-time job, and I was sort of scrambling and doing a lot of random things. I wrote for a Kenyan paper, I wrote art reviews, I did a lot of radio freelancing work, and was just hustling. And now, I haven't ever had a full-time journalism job, which for a long time I wanted, but now I wanted because of the financial stability and because my expenses were never paid, and that was always really, really hard. So if I wanted to go to Burundi, for example, to report, then none of my clients would pay for the flight or the accommodation. So I would buy a flight, stay with somebody's friend, and then file 10 stories. And that would maybe cover the flight and my food. So I wanted a full-time job because I wanted somebody to cover these basic expenses. But now I'm really enjoying being freelance because I work in multiple spaces and with different mediums, and I have just so much freedom in how I make things, where I make things, and that is a real gift.
Wow. So you've been all over the world. How does the film industry and the types of content that are popular differ around the world in your opinion?
Big difference so as a filmmaker, the most money for the projects that I'm working on comes from either North America or Europe. I work mostly in East Africa, and I'm now working in India, but there's not financing there. So it's mostly, kind of Western funders that are funding these projects. But there's a huge difference in the film landscape in continental Europe and in North America, UK. I'd say like Anglophone world is one bucket, and then continental Europe is another big bucket. And I think continental Europe, and to a lesser extent the UK, is way more connected to the rest of the world, if that makes sense, in terms of the kinds of films that get sort of circulated or funded. And yeah, in the US, there's a lot of market pressure. You know, the market shapes the films way more than in Europe, because there's a lot of state support in Europe, and the box office is not, you know, people aren't thinking about whether this film will make money, whereas here they most certainly are, and that totally shapes what the film is.
Does this affect how you create personally?
Yeah. So I live in France now, which was for this very reason. I'm American, but I find it very hard to make the kind of work that I want to make and have it supported in an American landscape.
So this March, I had the opportunity of going to South by Southwest, and it was a struggle to be able to go to try to get to this premiere, try to get to that premiere. So I see that SuddenlyTV was rewarded in 2023. Congratulations, first of all. So what is it like on the creator side? You know, to put your film in, to get these accolades. What is that like for you?
Yeah. That festival was crazy. I'm used to, I'd never seen anything like it, you know, just the scale of it, the corporate nature of it, to be honest, it was like alarming for me, to have all of these things that had these big corporate sponsors, but still a pass costs over $1,000, is, I think, a big problem, and kind of sums up my problem with the industry. And yeah, it was really funny because of course it's a huge, I say that, but at the same time, I have a huge amount of respect for the filmmakers and the work that was there and the programmers. You know, I don't think this is the kind of fault of any individual or team necessarily. I think it's just a system issue. But yeah, I enjoyed seeing films there and meeting other filmmakers. I got to see Boots Riley, who's my hero. And then I left actually before the award ceremony because I had a doctor's appointment I had to get back to in Paris, and so I was completely shocked, totally shocked. Also, just because I think the films that I saw and a lot of the people, you know, it's South by Southwest, so there's like famous people. Yeah, there's like Hollywood people there, and my film is like it's like kind of a homemade is not the right word, but you know, there's no like big team. It's sort of like, it felt like, yeah, I guess I was surprised that it won. I mean, I was really honored that it won, but it was really surprising that it won. And I'm sad that I missed it.
Okay. So in your work, you examine and bring to light the realities of the world, most recently Sudan with SuddenlyTV. What leads you towards documentary film instead of narrative film to tell these stories?
Total chance. I'm interested in narrative film, and recently my film has been programmed in Europe and a lot of shorts festivals that are they're both narrative and documentary. And so I'm meeting all of these narrative filmmakers, and I'm like, how do you do that? How do you make that thing? And for me, I just know how to make documentary, because I'm coming from journalism. I have this kind of, the sort of journalistic sensibility, I guess, and it's just what I know. And I think also what I was saying earlier about, I've never worked with big teams, so I don't know, and I'm really kind of colossally bad at like managing people or like being a boss or something. Like I have no interest in that. So I think even though I'm interested in narrative and fiction work, like the prospect of like having to hire people was what kind of terrifies me. So that's a reason that I like documentary, is it's like a thing that I can kind of, I can sort of do all the parts by myself. I am working now with other people, but yeah.
So AMTLab focuses on the intersection of arts and technology. What kind of technology and equipment do you use in your work in photojournalism and filmmaking?
For me, technology is, I just don't want it to get in the way. Like I use as small of a rig as I can, and I use things that can shoot in low light. That's like my big kind of requirements. So I used to shoot everything, both photo and documentary film, on a Canon 5D. Started with a Mark II, then a Mark III, then a Mark IV, because it was, it's like a workhorse. It does everything. And then I would have a shotgun mic attachment, and then I would have a lav and then a zoom and run that, and then put it in a pouch, and that was my kit. But then I realized that it was really hard, because there were times when people would hire me to shoot photo and video, and you really can't do both at the same time, even though your camera technically does. And for me, like, it was actually important to separate out the kits. So now I have a photo kit and a video kit. And now actually the latest video camera I bought is like a little Panasonic camcorder that shoots HD, which is great. It's really high quality and it's light. And I think my next project is going to be a film that the form that I'm interested in kind of working within is like a skate video style. So yeah, I'd say the tech stuff and the gear stuff is not something I think that much about, to be honest.
Last question. Your work shines a light on a lot of unheard stories around the world. How do you choose which stories to tell and how far to go when you're telling them?
How far to go, meaning like how much to travel, or like how like into the thing?
How into, because sometimes there's a line, there's a boundary where this is too much, or this is personal to this environment, this should stay here, stay with these people, and not be seen by the outside world. Like, where do you draw that line?
Yeah, that's a really good question that we should all think about. I've pretty much exclusively worked in places where I'm not from, and so that's you have to just be so conscious of not being kind of extractive and not parachuting in, and what is the thing that you're adding, right? Like, why are you telling this? Is there somebody here that could do it better? And for me, I'm often in places where there's not a lot of journalists, if any journalists, so it feels like just actually documenting the thing is important for posterity. I do think there are things that I don't feel comfortable doing, and I don't do them. Like, for example, right now I'm working on a film, and it's about a teenager, and there were some questions about like, oh, did you go film at home? Did you go film at school? And my team and I had not done that intentionally. Like, it wasn't important to the story, and it also just felt like that's not really a space that we want to cross into. And we also, when you ask somebody who you're filming with, can we do this? Asking is often, there's not, I think people often don't feel like they can say no, And so there's a lot of times when I just won't even, I won't even ask, because to ask is to pressure in some way, right? So, I think the other thing is, like, for example, SuddenlyTV is a film about one protest in the revolution, in Sudan's revolution, and I, unfortunately, there has not been many films that have come out about the revolution in Sudan, which is a shame, because it's a really incredible, important thing that happened. But the reason that there aren't films is because most of the filmmakers were really, like, participating in the revolution, and so it wasn't they had a more primary role. And then a lot of them lost their hard drives, like they were taken. And even more were lost last April when the war began, and people left their homes very quickly and things were confiscated. So it's I feel kind of strange about the success of this film, because I wish there were a bunch of other Sudanese filmmakers and films out there, and they're coming now. Actually, there's a lot of films that I know are, like, kind of late in production and in edit, and but yeah, I felt like my role in telling this story was, I'm gonna tell this very specific slice, the slice of a portrait of one protest in this big revolution. It's definitely not my place to tell the story of the revolution. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Tech in the Arts. Be on the lookout for new episodes coming to you very soon. If you found this episode informative, educational, or inspirational, be sure to send this to another arts or technology aficionado in your life. You can let us know what you think of this podcast by visiting our website, AMTLab.org. That's AMT-LAB.org. Or you can email us at amplabcmu@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at Tech in the Arts, or Facebook and LinkedIn at Arts Management and Technology Lab. We'll see you next time.